This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Time for school.
Hey, school success makers. Today we're joined by my new friend Peter out of the great state of Virginia. He's a history teacher at Wakefield School, as well as a co-founder and CEO of the 957 Project. We dive into all of it on today's episode, so please enjoy this next episode of the School Success Podcast. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new friend out of Northern Virginia, Peter Findler, who is the history teacher at Wakefield School, as well as the CEO of the 957 Project, which we'll dive into in just a few minutes so you guys can learn about that. But Peter, he has been in education for a while. He's just about to finish up his master's at UVA. So the guy is very well educated and loves the next generation and pouring into them. But I don't want to take any thunder away from him, so I will pass it off to him to introduce himself. So Peter, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks, Mitchell, for having me. It's great to be here.
It's going to be a blast, man. And I always like to start off the podcast with what is fun to do where you live. I always say, if I was to come visit, what would be something we would do for fun that day that's going to be just epic in that area?
Yeah, well, it's a long list. I live in sort of the outskirts, very far outskirts of the Northern Virginia area in Front Royal, Virginia. So we're in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We're not far from Skyline Drive, which, if you're local, you know is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So I love to hike. If you were here, we might go down to the Shenandoah River, do some kayaking, do some canoeing, some swimming. I also like to bike, so I like to cycle the back roads of the area here. So it's a beautiful area, and a lot of people that come out here, they fall in love with it right away. So I'm privileged, I'm blessed to be able to live out here and work out here, and so yeah, it's awesome.
Awesome. And I'm assuming there's apple orchards somewhere nearby.
There are plenty of apple orchards. There's plenty of vineyards around. In fact, I have my own set of apple trees out here in the backyard. My wife has built an incredible garden that I can see out my window right here, with all kinds of, food that we can go and snack on and eat. And we have our own honeybee hives, and
Ooh.
so yeah, it's a good time. A lot of work, but it's a good time.
I was just in, the DC area, so Northern Virginia area, last fall for a wedding of a friend of ours, and we went to a random apple orchard, and I've never done that before. I've been there. I mean, obviously here in Florida, there's only citrus all by us, and it was just that feeling of being around that apple orchards, and it was in October, so they were still there. They kind of missed the season a little bit, but they had the buckets of apples you could buy and fresh apple juice. And I was like, I love this. It was just a very cozy feeling because it was cool outside. The leaves were changing. I was like, Virginia's beautiful, absolutely beautiful state for sure. So
yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing and appropriate to talk about apples on a teaching podcast, right?
Because teachers love apples.
I guess so. I mean, I hate to perpetuate that stereotype, but I sure do. I love me some apples, and no, I know exactly what you mean with being out at the orchards and stuff like that. It's amazing.
Now, is there Honeycrisp anywhere near you? Because that is by far my favorite apple variety. Is that a thing there in Virginia?
Yeah, Honeycrisp, yeah, are delicious. Honeycrisp tend not to be as resistant to some of the pests that can wreak havoc on your apple trees, on your apple orchard. So you need a lot of care and a lot of spraying if you're going to grow apple Honeycrisp. But those are around, and but there are some varieties out here that I prefer in my yard that are a little more resistant to especially cedar rust. It's the worst. If you're within 5 miles of a cedar tree, you can contract cedar rust on your apple tree. So it's a constant fight to really, yeah, it takes a lot of work, but it's interesting. It's a good hobby to have, to get into and to learn, and learn and grow with the apple trees.
Well, I'm sort of learning it a little bit here. We have 2 trees in our backyard, but I got a lemon tree and an orange tree, and they're still little. We got 1 orange and 1 lemon, this past one, and it's so hard because you're supposed to cut off the growth to let it produce, like grow up and produce. That's such
Yeah.
a in my head. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm hurting
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
I'm learning it because that is a whole different world, man, of
Oh
to
yeah. Yeah.
realize and helping
Yeah.
them grow. So,
Yeah.
uh, what a great start to the podcast talking about fruit. I love it. But I want to hear about the 957 project first before we dive in. I know you shared a little bit about that with me before we started recording, but share with me kind of why you started this project, what you guys serve, what you do, and how schools can get involved.
Yeah, so the 957 Project is a nonprofit that partners educators and veterans to inspire young people. It takes its name from the time on September 11th, 2001, when the passengers and crew of United Flight 93 rose up and began a counterattack, which resulted in, unfortunately, the crash of the plane, but the saving of hundreds of lives in Washington, D.C., and the symbol of American democracy, the U.S. Capitol building. And so we do what we can to serve educators by bringing veterans to classrooms to talk about the incredible story of those 40 brave passengers and crew. It's a story that every person needs to hear, especially every young person. And the 957 Project began with really just a simple classroom visit. A friend of mine who is now my fellow co-founder and our chairman, John Hamilton, he and I met at a men's group at church, and as an educator, I'm always trying to bring different people into the classroom to get me off out of the center and stop talking and get some other voices in there, especially with my advisory. Which, for those of you that don't know, advisory is sort of an adult in the building who sort of like a homeroom teacher, but a more expansive role than that. Someone you can go to as an ally and an advocate. And so there's a little bit more structure in the schedule there, more time for advisors to meet with their advisees. But John came to visit me and share his, just his experience in the service when I was teaching at Washington Latin Public Charter School in DC. And this was during a lunch visit. And, he shared for about 25, 30 minutes, and it was really successful. But what happened next was really what was really ended up being extremely powerful and what we wanted to build on, which was that he stayed to eat his lunch during my history class. And just so happened that day, complete coincidence, that I was teaching about September 11th in my US history class that afternoon. And what happened was incredible. It turned into an impromptu oral history session, a student-led question and answer session with John. My students were very curious about September 11th in general. And it was that conversation that it began in lunch just kind of carried over into the classroom. And, we went out for a beer afterwards, and we were just like, wow, that was incredible. And we were also inspired by questions about conspiracy theories, because what we realized was that the history of 9/11 for teenagers at that time and continuing today, as with anything, can be accessed on YouTube. And so young people, they don't have the filters to decide and to distinguish and discern what is a valid source and what is not, and what is historical record and what is someone just sort of sharing their own opinions. Um, and so we really wanted to try to use the history of 9/11 and use the story of Flight 93 to inspire young people to lead lives of character and service. And that's really what we're all about at the end of the day. And so now, so from there, we began to bring groups of students to the Flight 93 Memorial in Pennsylvania. So primarily what we do is we provide veteran-led experiential trips to the Flight 93 Memorial, where students browse the museum and the memorial grounds, and then sit down and have their own student-led Q&A with a veteran, just like it happened in the classroom. We also provide a free curriculum guide that allows social studies teachers, and some of the lessons are really good for English teachers as well, but that allow educators to teach the history of 9/11 through the perspectives of American service members and their families. And we got access to an incredible resource, which is Andrew Carroll and the Center for American War Letters, which is the largest collection of war letters in the country. Andy, who now is on our advisory board, shared, for free of charge, this incredible set of letters from family members and veterans. And so what I did is I took those and I created 6 engaging student-centered lessons around those primary sources to equip social studies educators and English teachers that want to teach about that chapter in our recent history. So along with that, the last thing that we do is we provide veteran visits to classrooms that are either virtual or in person, depending on where you are. And COVID really helped us understand, as terrible as that whole process has been, that with the click of a mouse, we can be in any classroom all across the country at any time. So that's primarily what we do at the 957 Project.
I love that. I love it so much. And something that's just crazy, just makes me feel old when I say this, is remember it was a few years ago when they said the kids in high school that are learning about 9/11 are the first generation that wasn't alive for it when it happened. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm officially old, I guess I'd have to say, because it doesn't feel like that long ago in my head, because I was 9 when it happened. It was
Mhm.
90s, but I remember and like they say, everybody remembers where they were. Totally remember. It was because I was homeschooled my whole life, and I just remember my brother coming in and saying, hey, something happened. So these buildings are burning on TV. My mom came in and was like freaking out. And I did not understand. I was like, what is going on here? But I remember it clearly, but it's just crazy how long that's 20. I mean, over 20 years ago already.
Yeah. And you're a little younger than I am. I was in high school when it took place. So for me, it is a special connection for me as a high school teacher to be able to share not only my story, but just the way that the country has changed since that time. But you're right. Every student in America right now was not alive in K-12 was not alive when 9/11 took place. So everything that they know is something that someone else has told them about it, right? And so the burden on us as we approach the 25th anniversary of 9/11, which coincides with the same year as the 250th anniversary of the United States in 2026, as educators, we have a choice to make about, what we're going to share with them about 9/11. And I think there's a place for academic discussion about the history of 9/11 and how far back that goes, whether you want to go back to, the 70s and 80s, or back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement in World War I, or, the Ottoman Empire, even further back than that. But what we do at the 957 Project is we really focus on those 40 heroes and the actions that they took, the courage that they showed on board the plane, the resilience they showed, the teamwork that they showed. We know the historical record shows that they took a vote to decide what to do, perhaps the most democratic thing you could do before taking action. So, from a historical standpoint, it's an incredible story. It's a true story. It's one that if you made up, nobody would believe. But also from the standpoint of teaching teenagers and even down into the middle school age, that about lives of courage, about lives of resilience, about what it looks like to stand up in what feels like the most impossible of situations. It's an incredible story, and we want everyone to know the story. And it's been one of the more forgotten pieces of 9/11. There's a lot of focus on New York City. There's a lot of focus on the Pentagon, and that is, of course, well deserved. But the Flight 93 story, is one of a plane that went down in the middle of a field in Pennsylvania. But we think it's the best part, and we think it's one that can help influence young people positively.
Have you guys been able to connect with the families of those that were lost on there to talk about your project and have them be involved in some way?
Yes, we are in touch with a few family members, and we've even been able to encourage them to meet with our group. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, how can a school get involved and have this be a part of their school, or look at hearing more about you guys?
Yeah, so you can find us on the web at the 957project.org. If you go to the 957project.org/lines of fire, that's where you can find our curriculum guide. It's also linked on the homepage. There's a button for it. And you can reach out directly to me. If you want to put, my email address in the show notes, that would be fine. But really what we'd like to do is to find school partners that want to bring our veterans into their classroom, whether that be virtually or in person. Because while it does so much for our students, and my students report that it's the best thing they do all year, is our unit on 9/11, where I bring veterans in to talk about how that day changed their lives in such a powerful way. But what we'd like to do is bring veterans into classrooms as much as possible, because while it's helpful for kids, it's also incredibly powerful for veterans to be able to give back and to continue to serve in this way by sharing the inspirational stories of 9/11. It does so much for them, and it's really, I'm not a veteran myself, but I've seen how powerful this can be. Um, just in terms of how, giving context to their service and providing a way to inspire the next generation through the incredible stories of 9/11 and their life of service as volunteers in the United States military. We have a population of an all volunteer military that's less than 2% of the population. And so, it's important as a society, as a democratic society, that we continue to bridge that divide, to provide military veterans with a way to connect as they transition back to civilian life, but also to give civilians a way to empathize and understand what it's like to serve in that way. And really the message for kids is, whatever that service might look like, military or not, it's important to serve. It's important to give back to your communities.
Awesome. Thank you for plugging that. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Any schools that are listening, please reach out to Peter. You can even find him on LinkedIn as well, Peter Findler, and and get involved and be teaching that history. And obviously, he's a history buff, which we're going to dive into. I dive into now because he's a history teacher. So let's share about your school for a little bit. We switch gears. Tell us kind of what school you're at, how long you've been there, and we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I began my career at Washington Latin in DC. I spent 5 years there. It was an incredible experience. But my wife and I wanted more house, more land for less money. And as I mentioned earlier, we're on a very small farm out here. And so we began to look at independent schools, because while Washington Latin is a charter school, it really is run like an independent school by two incredible independent school leaders who were there during my time, Martha Cutts and Diana Smith. And so I ended up at Wakefield, which is in the Plains, Virginia. It's a school of about 370 students, pre-K through 12. My children are 5 and 10. They're both students at the school. My wife is a science teacher and our auxiliary programs director as well. So it's a family affair. We all pile in the car every morning and head off to school. And it's quite a blessing to be able to have that experience during this chapter in our lives. And so I've been at Wakefield for 7 years. So I'll be going into my 8th year in the fall.
Wow. And so your kiddo wasn't even born. Your youngest one wasn't even born yet and has been raised up. And now it's like, I get to go to school with you, Daddy. So that's
Right. Exactly.
That's
He
awesome.
loves it. Yeah.
So,
For now.
Yeah, I know as he gets older, he's like, I don't like this anymore, Dad. But hopefully, they love
yeah,
it.
it might be a little different, but we'll see.
So I always ask the guests, and you'll have a different perspective, which I like, is being on the history teacher side of it. But what kind of challenges do you guys see that you're facing either personally or you see the school facing, but also not just here are the challenges, but how are you guys combating those challenges that you guys are up against as a school?
Yeah, so I would say, two things come to mind. The first is with COVID, and I'm sure many of your listeners can identify with this, but COVID was truly, we're seeing this play out more and more every day, was an incredibly powerful turning point in the world, but also in terms of education. So one of the big challenges that we have faced is, while COVID has provided a boost in enrollment for us, public school districts are seeing a decrease in enrollment, and charter schools, parochial schools, independent schools, and homeschooling especially has seen an incredible rise. in a boost in enrollment there. And so that has been, great for us in terms of enrollment, as terrible as COVID has been. But it brings with it its own unique set of challenges. So, for example, in my classroom, I teach 9th and 10th graders, and we tend to get an influx of new students in 9th grade. So in this school year, the previous school year, we had new students coming from the public school arena. And so their last quote unquote normal year of school were as 6th graders, right? Because their 8th grade year was completely online. Their 7th grade year was cut short in 2020 when they went home early for the pandemic. So really their last full year of school was as 6th grade, and they're coming into 9th grade and sort of expected to do meaningful high school work. And for some students, that has not been a problem, right? They've transitioned seamlessly, and it's really been incredible to see that. But for others, they've struggled. And so the challenge is for us, how do we meet the needs of all of the learners in our classroom? That's always a challenge, right? But now that challenge has just become even more acute because of the lack of skills that students are bringing into the classroom, having been online for a year and a half. So in my world, that plays itself out primarily in reading and writing. Research has been really difficult. If the last time, you did, middle schoolers just tend to not do a lot of heavy research anyway, but I think in an online format, it was probably not as, and not as emphasized, or just all of the challenges that came along with online learning just have made it difficult to try to figure out how do we reach all the learners in the classroom. We're also seeing a rise in counseling plans as well, as student wellness becomes a point of emphasis for us, as it has, for many schools around the country. And because, while the academic issues became more, accentuated through COVID, so have the mental wellness issues. We were seeing a rise in teenage depression, anxiety before COVID, but the isolation from the world, the pervasive sense of death and dying, especially depending on where you were. Some of the larger cities, obviously hit more, was more visible for them, but that COVID only made those issues worse. And so it's a matter of really leaning in, being flexible with students, partnering with parents, and really trying to do our best to meet all those needs and all those demands as educators.
Man. Okay. Thank you for sharing those. And I always segue in from the challenges side. I was like, hey, this is your chance to brag about your school. What's going awesome for your school? What are you guys proud of? And if you can word it in a way, I guess, for people who are listening to go, ooh, I'd never thought about that before. Maybe we can do what they're doing because of this idea that Peter shared.
Yeah. So, and I mentioned there were two challenges. So one of them was COVID, but the second one leads into something that I'm excited about and proud of at my school, is civic education. So, and this is not necessarily an issue at our school, although it is because it's an issue nationally, is that, what we're seeing is a lack of let's see, how should I phrase this? We're seeing a rise in mistrust in civic society. That's a rise in mistrust of each other. That's a rise in mistrust of institutions, like, for example, scientists or law enforcement. And so what is the role of schools? And in addition to that, a lack of knowledge, right? So 1 in 3 Americans can't name all 3 branches of the US government. Half of all Americans think that a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling has more weight legally than a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling. So what's troubling about that is not just that people don't know those things, it's also that a lack of knowledge breeds an increase in mistrust. So people that don't understand how the Supreme Court works, and this has been shown, are more likely to not trust the decisions that it makes, and are more likely to agree with ideas that change the very nature of the independent judiciary, or to advocate for just getting rid of the Supreme Court altogether, right? So that knowledge forms the basis of a trust that must be held on to if we're going to continue to have a healthy democracy. So, as educators, what's our role? And so, one of the things that I'm really excited about is working with my colleagues at Wakefield, especially in my department, on a new vision for civics at Wakefield. So, what that looks like is making sure that at Wakefield, all students demonstrate a three main things. One is civic knowledge, an understanding of the foundational ideas, people, events of the founding of our country. Number two is civic skills. So, to what extent can our students engage in dialogue with one another, in healthy debate with one another around controversial topics? What we're seeing with adults is that it's becoming increasingly stressful and increasingly frustrating to talk about difficult topics with each other. So we need to build capacity in young people to do that, so that when they become adults, and now, especially for teenagers in high school, they have the ability to and desire to engage in those dialogues. And the third part is civic agency. So to what extent do our students volunteer? um, how interested are they in community service, whether that's off campus or on campus? So those three things, civic knowledge, civic skills, and civic agency, form the backbone of this new vision that we're pursuing at Wakefield, that can really help to stem the tide of what we're seeing nationally, but also provide our students with the support that they need and empowering them to be people who are engaged civically. So, for example, we have our student government association is called Community Council. A few years ago, I became frustrated with the way that our student government association was running, as were my students. So I sat down with them and I said, guys, what would it look like if we were to build something different? And I solicited advice and feedback from faculty members, from students, and really sat down and thought, okay, how can we reimagine what a student government organization would look like? And what it's called at our school is Community Council. And Community Council is open to all upper school students and will be going down into the middle school next year as well. So there's no barrier to leadership, right? You don't have to be elected to be a member of the leadership. All you have to do is volunteer. You just have to have the desire to do it. Now, within the structure of Community Council, we have elected leaders, and they're called prefects. And those prefects are at every grade level, and there's 4 seniors who are a team of leaders. There's no president, vice president structure. There's no hierarchical structure in that team of 4. There are 4 leaders that have to collaborate together as a team that have specific roles, but that lead in that way within Community Council. And so you ask what one thing that I'm excited about. I'm excited about our students. I mean, we had 50 students that showed up every single Thursday this past school year on their own time, during their time when they could have been studying or hanging out with friends, to talk about ways that we can make Wakefield a better place and how we can improve the learning experience. And that's been really great. I also just want to share, I'm so thankful for the faculty members that have also joined, because it's also open to all faculty members. And so the core group of teachers that joined me have been instrumental. I couldn't do it all by myself. And that's been just really incredible. I also have the support of my administrators, especially Ashley Harper, our head of school, to go forth and to empower our students to be leaders. And so that's something that I'm really excited about. I'm proud of the work that our kids have done, and I'm hopeful for what's to come in the future as well.
Awesome. And are you guys, you mentioned growing because of with everything going on, you guys have grown. Do you guys have capacity to grow bigger with building size and how many teachers you guys have?
Yeah, a little bit. We have a little bit of capacity. I'm not privy to all of the discussions at the highest levels of administration at our school, so I don't know what the magic number is for us. I'm sure there is a ballpark figure of where we can handle in terms of our campus and our classroom space and our staffing. But we've got more space, a little bit, and especially at certain grade levels. Um, but yeah, it's an exciting time.
Oh man, awesome. Well, what are you most looking forward to this coming school year? Anything that's stands out to you? Like, I can't wait for the fall.
Well, I am excited about the civic piece of things. That is very exciting. I think last year was really a roller coaster. May be too strong of a word, but I learned a lot of lessons from just like I said before. That influx of new students was really a challenge, and so being able to step back now and say, okay, given what we know about what happened last year, how can we improve next year? And to me, there's a lot of work that we can do in assessment, especially pre-assessment, ongoing assessment, and summative assessment. We need to be in tune with where students are at all times. And we need to do a better job of really figuring out at the beginning of the year, where are our students at academically, socially, emotionally, and really try to build capacity for them from the very beginning, instead of just kind of trying to catch up the whole time. So that's something that I'm really excited about working on with my students, especially. But I love what I do. I mean, I'm excited about all of it. I get to talk about history all day with young people, and I wasn't a great student when I was young. I was actually a very unsuccessful student. So it's true, and so I don't see myself as someone who's there to sort of preserve tradition. I'm trying to be the teacher that I wish my teachers were for me. And look, I was an unsuccessful student because of my own doing, but at the same time, there were experiences that I had that I wish I had not had, and I aim to really to center relationships with my students first, and then the content comes after that. I found that to be a successful formula. That's what would have worked for me. That's what inspires me as a teacher, and it seems to be what's working in my classroom as well.
I love that model too, because I putting my one of my personal hat on or whatever. I was a youth pastor for 7 years when I lived in Alaska, and I remember one of the first churches I was working at. The pastor came up to me, and I love the man to death. He was an awesome guy. He actually passed away last year. He was 70, I was 18 when I started there, so we obviously didn't see completely eye to eye on things of like how I wanted to do stuff. Well, I was very much on the side of, I want to become a kid's friend, and so I can have that relationship to really pour into them and minister to them and stuff. And I remember him pulling me aside one time. He goes, I don't want you being their friend. I want you to be their pastor. And I
Mm.
was just like, I get where he was coming from. And I was like, man, I just feel like it's going to work better on the friend side of it. And eventually God called me to another church a couple of years later. And that pastor, I remember telling him, like, hey, this is how I like to do things. And he's like, I love that. Do it. Like, whatever. And in my opinion, it worked really well because I connected on that personal level, took the kids out for coffee and went to their sports games. It was like I was a friend. I remember one time one of the kids invited me to his birthday party. He's one of my high school kids. He was like, Pastor Mitchell, will you go to snowboarding with me for my birthday party with all my friends from school? And I was like, you want your pastor to go snowboarding with you and your friends from school? And he's like, yeah. He goes, you're one of my friends. And I was like, bro, I will be there. And so I went there and I was snowboarding with all these high schoolers, and it was awesome. And so I'm like, that's where I wanted to get to, like that friend level, because then they're going to share things with you on a different level and connect with you better, listen to you better. So when you share that, that's what made me think of, is like you're connecting with those students where they're like, man, Peter, he loves and cares for me, and I'm going to listen to what he has to say because I have that relationship with him on that level. At least that's what I see from the outside looking into that. I think that I like that model a lot. I mean, I don't know if you
Well, it's
agree.
yeah, well, it's knowing who they are as learners and making it clear to them that you care about who they are as a student and as a learner, and that you're going to do what you can to better understand what their interests are, where their strengths are, where their areas of growth are, and that you're going to set high expectations for them, but you're going to be there every step of the way to help them meet those high expectations. That to me is the model that I use, and where I found that I can be their best advocate and to really help them understand that learning is an incredible, amazing thing, and that it's sometimes hard to remember within the structure of a school and a school day and all of that. But that I'm a learner too, and I love history and I love teaching. So everything that I can learn about those two things, I'm going to do.
Well, as we look to wrap everything up, my final question I always ask is asking for a piece of advice or wisdom you'd share with the school leaders that are listening. So, getting into to asking Peter the last question, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of advice. I would say that we're seeing teachers leave the profession in record numbers, and that is really troubling. There's only so many things that an administrator can control, but there are things that administrators can control to help support teachers. And I think we have to, as school leaders, need to remember to take care of their faculty as a faculty member would take care of their students, right? Because we're the ones who are interfacing with kids all day, every day. And so we're taking care of them. So who should be supporting faculty? That should be your staff. So what does that look like? I was reading an article the other day, which the headline was "Innovative New Solution Helps Keep Special Education Teachers in the Classroom." And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I clicked on the link and I read the article, and the innovative solution was to give all of the special ed teachers $10,000 more a year. Right. And I was like, well, yeah, okay. I guess it's innovative, sadly, because it's uncommon. But the teachers that were interviewed were like, yeah, no, I couldn't afford to live in my house without more money, and especially the demands that are on special ed teachers are incredible. So, but I think things like sabbatical programs where teachers have paid leave for a year or maybe 6 months to go and travel and learn more about the craft, to come back and share what they've learned with the faculty. Things like tuition discounts for teachers who have children at independent schools is huge. Making sure that teachers know that they're cared about and that they are prioritized as the most important part of a school. The kids are always the focus, but like I said, who's taking care of the kids? It's the teacher. So we have to prioritize teacher well-being as well as student well-being. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's hard to do, but that is free, is to create a climate and a culture of where the life of the mind is important in a school. That, teachers are drawn to the profession for two main reasons. One is because they care about kids, and the other is because they care about their field of study, especially as you get older into the middle and upper school areas and high school. So I think we focus a lot on taking care of kids, and that's always front and center, and it should be. But I think sometimes what gets lost is the attraction that teachers had to their field, to their discipline. And so how can we promote a school culture which values, to borrow from my classically trained colleagues, that values the true, the good, and the beautiful? How can we promote that as a culture that permeates all the way down to the youngest students, all the way up to your top level administrators, right? Having a common read, a book that's shared, that we have discussions around about how to improve the craft, even if those ideas are old. If you have to read John Dewey or whatever that might look like, I think that's an aspect of advice that I would give for making sure that teachers continue to be inspired to enter the classroom every day. It's hard to do, but it's free. It doesn't cost any money. So.
Well, Peter, thank you for taking time to be on the podcast, for what you're doing with your project and your nonprofit there for teaching kids about 9/11 and pouring into the history. History is very important, and I will say, like what you said, I'm not a history buff. My wife is a history graduate, loves history, and I like it, but it was one of my least favorite subjects growing up. I think it would also relate to, like, I just didn't have the greatest way of learning that, or teacher that was whatever. It just wasn't sticky. But man, I've heard some stuff since then and how people teach it, and I can tell you'd be fun. You'd be a fun teacher to have. So I hope you're encouraged from this. I hope that you will have an awesome upcoming school year. But just a huge shout out and thank you to you for what you do and for pouring into that next generation, because I can see you love it and I can see you're passionate about it. So wishing you nothing but the best, and you and your family. And I hope you have a ton of apples this coming season from your apple trees. But thank you so much for hopping on today with me.
Thanks, Mitchell. It's been a pleasure.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Peter for taking time and being on the podcast today. I loved our chat. And even before we had the podcast recording, him and I had a phone conversation, and I asked him some of these history questions that I had in my head, and he knocked all of them out of the park. He did great with them. So he is meant to be a history teacher, and he's doing a great job at it. So I'm wishing him and his school nothing but the best as they continue to pour into and educate this next generation that's coming behind us. And I also wish him nothing but the best with his nonprofit, the 957 Project, and them getting involved with more schools across the country. And if you guys are looking to get involved or hear more about it, you can visit them online, the957project.org. That's the957project.org to learn more about that. And if you're a school listening and you're like, man, I wish I had some more help with growing enrollment or a better system for how to handle leads that are coming into my school and to get them through our application process, we love helping schools with that. It's one of our specialties. So I'd love for you to find us online at schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. We would love to hear from you. And I would personally love to see you in our private Facebook group just for school leaders called School Success Makers. It's obviously on Facebook, so check us out. It's free, School Success Makers. It's a private Facebook group just for school leaders like you. We'll be here next week with another awesome guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.